For the first episode of ADHme, ADHwe, it's only fitting that the first guest would be someone who I got to have a conversation with in KubeCon Detroit after we gave the panel that I was on with Heba, with Rich, and with Farah, where we talked about our experiences with ADHD. This was, of course, inspired by Lead, so got to give him credit as well. But we had so many questions that we didn't get to respond to and didn't get to interact with a lot of folks that after the talk, I got a chance to catch up with some people who are in the audience. And one of them is the first speaker on the podcast. His name is Zachary Punches. He's an amazing person. If you're a Star Wars fan, you're definitely going to dig this. If you like cooking, you're definitely going to dig this. And on top of that, if you want to hear the experience of a person who embraces ADHD with open arms, accepting who he is, trying to find the strengths that he gets from it while accepting the things that are tough through a process that's gone on for quite a long time. I really think you're going to like this episode, the first one. Thank you so much, Zach, for being with us. And I look forward to seeing your comments, your feedback, ideas, suggestions, anything that we should be including in future episodes, as well as if you'd like to nominate someone who we should be getting in touch with to have them on, please let us know. Hope you enjoy it. Let's do it. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the first inaugural episode of ADHme, ADHwe. I'm here with Zach Punches, who is an absolutely amazing human. I had the pleasure to meet him in KubeCon in Detroit last year in 2022. And we connected because of a talk that I was involved in with other folks speaking about their experiences, what it means to them, and realized from that there are a lot of conversations that can happen about this and need to happen. And Zach was one of the people I was able to talk to after we did our talk. So that being said, Zach, can you just introduce yourself really quickly? Who are you? What do you do? Who is Zach?
Oh, hi, I'm Zach. I am the lead cloud infrastructure engineer for Allergan Data Labs. That is my day today. Very much ADHD, with, like all of us, passions across the whole board of, all the interests.
Good. And yeah, and one of those interests that we were talking about before we got started, things that you're good at, things that you like to do. Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh man, cooking. I'm huge into food. You probably can't tell behind me, but I've got a stack of something like 8 cookbooks back there, and that doesn't include all the digital cookbooks and everything else. I'm huge into food. Absolutely love it. I joke that computer engineering just allows me to fund my hobby of cooking.
And could you talk a little bit about what is it that you get from cooking? What is it that excites you?
Oh, sure. I have a deep love of really good food. You can have an excellent meal like every single day. There's few things on this planet that can, especially for us ADHD folk, get that dopamine release quite like a really good meal. And I don't know, it just sort of stuck with me. And now I have like a wall full of knives in my kitchen.
Good. And with that, once again, the very large world that can be explored, an environment where you're not really going to get, you can get bored, but there's always something new that you can take on as a challenge. I think that's cool. I also see behind you that you've got some Star Wars stuff.
Oh yeah, I have. Oh man, the other side of those books is Star Wars books, and then behind me is also just a bunch of different Mandalorians. I got Star Wars tattoos. I was like 5 years old. I saw Darth Vader storm Tantive 4, which is the ship that he gets for the rebels that Princess Leia is on, and that delicious terror I felt as Vader came onto the ship branded me.
Okay.
Branded me for life.
So that's where it started. It continues today.
Oh yeah, I think it was like 5. Almost 5 when it started.
That's pretty strong. With that in mind as well too, you have 4 dogs, I believe. Do any of them have a Star Wars name?
They don't, but my cats do.
Okay.
I have 2 cats, one named Kip. He was my first pet. Super obscure Star Wars reference from back before Disney bought Star Wars. And then I have Anakin. He's my tabby cat.
Okay. Very, very good. And your dog's names, just for the record?
Oh, yeah. I have a black boxer named Stitch. I have I think he's like half hippopotamus, half pit, I think. His name is Zeus. We have a little terrier. He's like 15 years old at this point, this terrier. He's, I don't know, half terrier, half chorizo. His name is Charlie. He's reached, he's all white in the face at this point, a little plump, but, hey, he's lived this long. And then we have a 6-pound Morkie named Jagger. He was my mom's dog, and she named him after Mick.
Okay.
makes sense.
Wow. Very, very eclectic mixture of animals, also with food influences and other things along the way. It's the first time I've heard of a pittopotamus, or I don't know what we would call that kind of a hybrid.
I believe the official title is a Chonkosaurus Rex.
Good. You're gonna have to send photos afterwards so we can put this on. We
sure.
can put this on social. Good. Now, so we are here to talk about ADHD, what it means to you, what it means to the world. Zach, to make things consolidated, condensed for folks out there, I asked you to define your ADHD because at the end of the day, it's a very personal experience. How do you define your ADHD? Could you do that in 140 characters?
Sure. I would say it's a constant battle, but every day I'm more equipped to handle it. I adore how fast my brain processes, but I absolutely wish it was still better at like taking a second to make sure that what it's processed is like the correct answer rather than just the answer I arrive at first.
Wow, that's really good. It may not have been 140 characters, but an awesome reflection worth 140 points. To unpack that a little bit, I think, once again, every experience is different for everybody out there. But in my case, I definitely feel the accelerated thoughts. And also, that can go into an area where we're talking to different specialists in the area, is that what is a thought? Is a thought a fact? Does it mean, is it just something that's kind of sparking in your head? And so sometimes in my case, I don't know how it is for you, but jumping to conclusions or that something just becomes a biblical fact because I process it quickly. And then later I realized that I just moved too quickly. But what's your experience like with that?
Oh man, so I actually described this quite a few times to friends and to coworkers and stuff. And the thing is, generally speaking, for the non-ADHD folk, or I'm talking to non-ADHD folk, I tell like, look, I'm going to process the information faster than you, but that doesn't mean I'm right. That just means I arrived at my answer first. I can absolutely be wrong. And that's where it goes back. Like, I wish I was still better at taking a second to reprocess what I've thought about to make sure I'm correct. But like, like once you get through it, you've thought about it, this is fact now, and you're running on this. And so like, oh, wait, what about this thing? And you're like, oh man, everything I just like figured in my head is completely wrong because I didn't focus on this one little bit over here. Great.
Yeah. Yep. And that, whether it's a preference or I don't know if it's a preference, but through being impulsive, you get pushed to something really, really quickly, even if you don't want to, but it's just your natural process to automatically be jumping ahead and jumping ahead and jumping ahead. And then like it happens to me all the time of realizing, oh, I didn't realize I already had something booked on my calendar. I didn't realize that if I had read the instructions at the beginning, really bad at reading instructions, not good at doing that, need lots of help with that. That's why for me, like putting IKEA furniture together is exhausting because I want to skip steps that you can't skip. I definitely hear you on that. And there was the other thing that you mentioned too about, if it's something that you can find some balance, and I think that's really up to everybody. What do you do to find balance, to get the strengths from your ADHD, and then to try to downplay the things that maybe kind of interfere sometimes?
Sure. So it's kind of a big question, but that's fine, right? I think it's also the realization that in the back of my head that even when I arrive at my answer, there's something that goes off at this point that reminds me, you could be wrong. And so, especially when it comes to like, work and everything else, like I definitely rely on my peers when I come up with an idea to like really pick it apart because I for sure like haven't thought through everything. And so like using those external sources to help like pull me back from, like way off back to where we need to be is definitely helpful to like figure out to make sure that I'm not just like going down the wrong answer and staying there.
Got it. I think that's a great point. And in my case, I anticipate exactly what you just said, that like I'll have something really quickly, but it doesn't mean it's correct. And that I need to have blockers in there to make sure that I don't run too far with something and put too much effort in something that later is going to be a pain to untie all the knots and start over and rebuild that piece of IKEA furniture that if I had just read the first step, that would have been fine. I think that's good though. And I think sort of the lesson is knowing those impulses, knowing those tendencies, and then what sort of things can be put in there in place to prevent them from perhaps going too far. Now, in typical ADHD fashion, we've kind of jumped ahead and I skipped a bit of a question. So to go back, can you tell us about your experience, about how you found out about this? What was that like?
Sure. So I've actually sourced like a bunch of different people on this to like figure out how they've been doing. Cause like we're all curious like how we all found out. I'm actually kind of grateful. So my mother, back when I was in first grade, she was told by the teacher that like, Zach is bouncing off the walls all the time. He doesn't really listen. He probably has ADHD. You want to put him on meds. My mother didn't want me on meds right away. She wanted to make sure that it was like actually a thing, and I didn't want me on meds too early, right? Brain development and all that stuff. And so basically from the course of like first grade to seventh grade, and I had no knowledge of this the entire time, just so you have an idea. Like my mother told me about this years after even I graduated high school that she had done this, but she sent in psychologists into my classroom just to watch me, just to like see my actions, don't interact with me at all. I have no recollection of anyone being in any of the classrooms, but over the course of like those 7 years, everyone was like, oh, ADHD, get him on meds. And so after like, I think I got on meds the end of 8th grade. And so that's kind of how I found out. I found out fairly early compared to a lot of folks.
Yeah. And once again, this is the entire point of this podcast, is to see experience by experience what it's like, because some folks will have one like yours and then others like mine. I'm very old. I'm 37, and it was only when I was 36. Okay, still, but yeah, is that everyone finds out at a different way and at a different time and for different reasons. So since then, how has the development been for you? What have been the things that you've encountered along the way? Now I'm already jumping ahead to one of my other questions, but what are the things that you've learned through this process? But like, how has that been up until now?
Yeah, so I'm actually really grateful that I found out earlier rather than later. And I assume a lot of folks who found out later are the same, because like the difference, let's say, between yourself and me, you found out 2 years ago, a year or two ago?
A year ago, yeah.
Yeah, a year ago. I found out 23 years ago, right? Ish. And so I've had 23 years of practice of knowing that I have ADHD and how ADHD affects your life, to be able to like play through it and like, oh wait, I'm doing this because of that. I can see this now. It's just, I've had lots of years of experience, which great, really helpful.
I think that's a good point, because it's having that framework to understand where these things come from, why you do the things that you do, and to not perhaps be, once again, just assuming, be hard on yourself for having those kind of tendencies. Like, look, this is just who I am, and I have to accept that, and I have to love myself for who I am and not for who I'm not. And in my case, because there's such a big process of like unpacking all of these years of realizing, oh, wow. So, emotional dysregulation here, rejection sensitivity dysphoria here, different elements of that you realize like, okay, maybe it doesn't always have to be 100% because of ADHD, but that there's an influence there, that there's something going on. In my case as well, too, of, talking to other family members, realizing that there's a bit of a current amongst us, some with certain characteristics, others with others. That process of discovery, it's like I said, a lot of it though is just kind of hit you in the face all at once. And so, like I said, your experience being a little bit different. Can we talk a little bit about the topic of medication? Which ones you started with? Have you changed? What's your experience been like with that?
Oh yeah, I've run a gamut of medications. So starting freshman year, I got on Concerta XR, extended releases. And I don't know, after about a couple of weeks, I didn't notice this, which is, I guess, an extra negative, but I ended up turning significantly more aggressive. Combine that with like teenage hormones, and it was not great. I could focus, but I was almost like always looking for someone to just start something with me so I can get into a fight with them. Like I'm just looking for it. And I didn't find out the reason why that happened to me until much later. It turns out that the XR medication has a different molecule in it that I've heard something like 5% of ADHD folks are affected by this molecule. I don't know if it's 5%. I do know that very few people are actually affected by it, but that XR molecule makes us more aggressive. And so currently I'm on Adderall IRs, the tablets, the instant releases. They last for like 6 hours. I don't get aggressive on those. It's just something in me, that XR chemical. So I started out with Concerta, super aggressive. I moved to Strattera, which is a non-stimulant ADHD med. And I had a very similar experience like most folks. It works, but it doesn't quite work like the full-on stimulant. After Strattera, I took a break from meds for a few years, like 4 or 5 years. I wanted to do it by myself. That was a mistake. I find that I'm much better on my medication. And then I got onto Adderall XRs in my early to mid 20s. Aggression came back. About a month later, I switched to the IRs, and I've been on IRs for like, I don't know, something like 8 years or a decade at this point.
Yeah.
It's been a long time.
Got it. Yeah. No, but I think it's really good for you to be sharing this because like I said, everybody's experience is different. In my case, I started with Concerta and then they upped it and it wasn't quite working for me. And then so switched to Elvance, or like, it's different. There's different names in Europe and the US, Elvance, I'm not sure anyway.
Maybe Vyvanse here in America?
Could be. I really should look into that because since I'm going to be talking about this with a lot of people, I should probably get my names right. But I think the main point here is, and because I don't want, I once again, in my case, the process was quite overwhelming. And also because of having ADHD, being in a hurry, wanting quickest results possible. Like, okay, like I've been willing to go through the diagnosis process. You know, I'm being transparent, I'm being candid, I'm putting in a lot of effort. And now I want to see changes. And you will see changes, perhaps not necessarily the ones you've anticipated. I think the main point here is, from what you said, in my experience, the science is not exact. And there's got to be some patience in there, which is why with the medication part is one thing, the psychological part, making sure that you have the right support and folks that understand what this process is going to be like. I was not properly informed once I got my diagnosis, and it was kind of just like, hey, now go out and be free and do whatever you want. It's like, wait a minute. And then simultaneously, like good luck. Here you go. No,
here's your packet.
Pretty much. And I think that I don't want to say it's criminal that it is that way, or it was in my case, but I think there need to be a lot of different. I would give people a lot more resources than the ones that I got. It's like, here's your diagnosis, this is the explanation, and like that's it. So I highly recommend to folks have a holistic approach. Don't just focus on one element or the other. Be willing to try. Be willing to fail, or that it's not going to work out 100%. Like I said, that's definitely something I would put out there, just because it's not a perfect match. The dosage, all those different things are going to come in there. And it's interesting too that you did have an experience for a few years when you went off, and then realizing that overall that it's better to be with it than without. Once again, all these things are individual experiences, so I can't say exactly like this is what you should definitely do or this is what you definitely shouldn't. Just speaking from that basis. So your biggest,
one thing to stress as well: there's no silver bullet. It is a collection of things that make it easier for you. Because at the end of the day, way our brains are wired, we are not wired for society as it currently is, right? Like with work and how you're supposed to handle your emotional regulation and the impulsivity, our brains aren't super wired for typical society. And so there's not, like I said, not just one thing you do to fix it all. It is a bunch of things.
Yeah. Alternatively, we could start our own society where the rules will not apply. And if anybody wants to join, this is my Patreon account. No, I'm kidding.
Nothing will ever get done. We're doing it tomorrow.
Exactly.
We all just got stuck in conversation all day. We were supposed to build this, but
I know. I feel so bad for my wife sometimes because she'll be like, you want to do something? Like, you don't want to talk for the next 4 hours? I have a lot of things I can say. But shout out to my wife for her patience. But now, so you've already talked about some of the learnings. Are there any learnings that you haven't mentioned so far that you would like to put out there, things you've learned about yourself in this process, or things that you think would be beneficial for others to keep in mind?
Yeah, so lots of things. One of the things that I'm not even going to ask, but how many of us are lose your stuff all the time? Put something down, can't find it, right? Typical ADHD trait. So and it sounds so simple, but something that I drilled into my head a long time ago that absolutely helps. As an example, keys in my wallet, they have specific places they live in my house. So when I get home, they go right into that spot. Oh yeah, if I can't tell you, and even that, it's any system that I use or trick that I have, it works most of the time. But then you can outsmart your own trick. That's amazing. You can. And what I found also really works is you layer multiple fail safes. So if you don't do it this way, you have something else in place, another trick or something to remind you to pull it back to this way, and you have like a couple of catch-alls along the thing. And the best way I can explain it is for those of us who like put their keys or their wallet or whatever in a specific place, sometimes you won't, but also knowing where you would end up putting those when you don't put it there, right? Like, oh yeah, so it's not in this spot, but knowing me, it's either in this spot, or this spot, because like those are the 3 that I go into, those catches to make sure that your tricks work, because your tricks aren't going to work all the time.
No, they're not. And I think that once again is that I think for some of us that it's like, now I'm going to find solutions and now I'm going to change my life. You will, and it's not going to work 100% of the time. And if it works 75% of the time, that's great, because that's still an improvement. But I, once again, as a newbie in all this, attach myself to this idea. If there's going to be 180-degree changes, and no, the 180-degree change is a deeper internal understanding and accepting myself. That can be, in my case. But I think that there's this idea of like, now I'm going to be super organized and be, like the perfect example of an organized person. Maybe there are some cases, but in general, probably not. And that's totally fine. And so I think, like you said, it's anticipating that stuff, knowing that it's going to happen. We don't need to be too hard on ourselves when it does. But I think a lot of people would agree with that. With that in mind, do you use any system or app or anything like that to organize your tasks? Like particularly with your job, is there anything like that? Do you write notes? What do you do?
Oh yeah, I'm a big note taker. That's one of the big things. And a lot of my job at this point is interaction with the other departments of my job, making sure that like the stuff that they need from the cloud infrastructure team gets handled and like that kind of thing. And so what I have found really works as my company uses Slack reminders. Hey, I can't do this right now, but I'm gonna put a reminder to have Slack ping me about this message tomorrow. Oh man, works great. I'm a huge fan of reminders in general. I'm always using my phone. Hey, remind me to do this at this time, all the time. I always try to do things like, to-do list, Wunderlist, AnyList things. I think I have all of those, and copious lists in every single one of them. And then also typical ADHD trait, I forget to do it like one day, and then I never use it again.
Yeah. I recently, with ADHD, I was like, Evernote, the best thing that's ever going to happen to me. And I paid for premium, and like I was just in there just grinding it out and writing all this stuff. And then, like you said, maybe it was one day I didn't do it, or I don't know what happened. And so now I use, chats with myself on my phone. I have different ones depending on like, one's more for work and then other ones more just for like personal projects or stuff like that. And that works. And then I'm also a big note taker. I'll write emails to myself. I use reminders in my calendar, stuff like that. Slack I actually hadn't thought about, but I'm a big believer in reminders, and almost like we'll have a reminder for my reminder because I don't trust it. So that's good. Any other learnings that you want to put out there? Things that you've discovered about yourself? Yeah.
So one, I found back in the day researching like how ADHD works and everything like that. And as you stated before, the science is not all like accurate yet, and it's really not. It's still fuzzy. In fact, it's even hard to diagnose ADHD as ADHD since it shares so many common factors with things like very different levels of autism and like things like that. It's really hard to narrow down. But that being said, I did find a doctor, Dr. Russell Barkley. He's like a huge, one of the big forefronts in like ADHD and how it works, and he really dives into how to put this, like examples, but people always like struggle with explaining ADHD and how it works, and the way he explains it, even as someone with ADHD and hearing it that way, like he has an example about a missile system, okay? And so someone with ADHD is basically the smartest possible missile system you could ever have. You want a single target taken out with no with no side effects or whatever. This is the missile to use. It doesn't have any fuel, so good luck. And essentially, that fuels our motivation, right? That the dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine combination of chemicals, which at the end of the day, ADHD folks lack. We're really terrible at motivation. And so understanding like how he described, you have this super intelligent, hyper smart thing, but it just can't do it because there's no fuel, helped, like, to mention like one of his things, the whole YouTube channel, I very much recommend him, but like really helped me realize, that's really the struggle more than anything else. It's less about figuring out how the thing needs to get done and more how to get myself started on the thing to get it done, right? Figuring out a way of fueling that missile system.
That's a really, really good insight. And at the same time, though, maybe we can go a little bit deeper on this, is that people with ADHD were known for being very, very high energy. What's the difference between, where does that drop off with motivation? What do you think about that?
Oh yeah, so I have a term for that in my head that I have realized over the course of many years. It is, I refer to, there's a part of the ADHD brain that I refer to as the petulant child. And by the petulant child, I mean, and I'm sure you can relate, so you're supposed to do X. You'll get in your brain about all the reasons why you can't do X right now. Oh, I'm a little tired, I'm a little hungry, I want to do this thing first or this other thing, and it's very difficult to convince your brain to actually do the task at that point. I refer to that as a petulant child. So you're trying to convince a kid who doesn't want to do the thing you're telling him to do it. And it might not throw a temper tantrum, right? Like, you're not going to get a temper tantrum when you're hitting it angry necessarily, right? But you're going to really just like not do it. Like, that kid is just going to be like, no, I don't want to do it. Make me, kind of thing. And so, for me, as like part of that acceptance and like things like that, like you were mentioning, is like realizing that part of the brain, and sometimes you can win that battle and sometimes you can't. And it's okay when you can't.
Yeah. That's you nailed it. It is okay when you can't. And as much as you're going to want to try, these internal processes are so well established, and it's like, it's almost already over before it starts. Right. I think sometimes, whereas that's kind of the feeling, I think then the additional feeling that happens, or at least can happen to me, is that being really hard on myself, the disappointment, the lack of self-esteem, like, you suck, you can't do anything, you can't even do the most basic thing, like that. And then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because you're going to be in these situations where that will happen. And then you're like, oh, well, I'm going back to my discourse of being really, really hard on myself, and things like that. So don't be hard on yourselves, folks.
Very, very true.
Try it. I think that's the, once again, a theme that's in this conversation has been one of anticipating these moments, right? It's like, this is going to happen, and will you have a perfect playbook? There are different ways to go about it. Some folks will have a totem to remind themselves, whether it's a picture or a ring or a bracelet or things like that, to sort of slow down those processes and say, like, okay, don't fall in that trap. Maybe just go to the other room. I don't know what it is, but I think it's interesting, just because it faced, like, when people see or interacting with folks with ADHD and they see all this energy, and then not realizing that while there's a lot of energy, at least in my case, with starting things, maintaining things is, and what you said before we got on the call, jack of all trades and master of none. Like, I'll start playing a new musical instrument, but I'll stop the one that I actually really enjoyed, but I don't know why I stopped doing it. But, anyway, just the attraction to something new. These are all the challenges that folks with ADHD face. Not everyone, once again, very personal experience, but a challenge that's faced by quite a few, I would say. Is there anything else that we haven't talked about in terms of recommendations, things that you're like, hey, if you're new to this world, I would definitely recommend doing this, or I wish I had done this earlier? Anything that you've used, whether it's sports, meditation, diet, anything like that that's been helpful?
Yeah, so a couple of things. Actually, quite a few things. So one, and this is true of everybody, not just ADHD folks, but cardio, right? Getting your blood pumping. It actually increases the level of dopamine in anybody's brain, right? And so I'm going to use fake numbers to kind of describe the scale here, right? So let's just say you have 100 dopamine in your head, normal person, 100. Once again, the numbers don't matter. We're just scale. Okay, you do a bunch of cardio, and it goes from 100 to 110. That's some increase, sure. ADHD folks, we have, let's say, 30 dopamine. When we start doing cardio and we get that extra 10, 30 to 40 is a huge jump, considering 100 to 110, percentage-wise. And so cardio has huge benefits to, I find that it removes a lot of that intense energy throughout the day, to allow you to better focus and better formulate your plans. Like, it removes some of that chaos in your brain just by like burning off that energy.
I definitely, sorry to finish, please.
Oh, go ahead.
No. This is going to be a ADHD competition. Who interrupts you? You go first.
Yeah. So that's definitely one of them. I'm very much into my medication. But one thing that I have found with a lot of ADHD folks, that they look at medication as, if you haven't taken meds and you first start taking meds, you're going to notice like a night and day difference, right? All of a sudden you are going to think, oh, this is how my brain is supposed to work. This is incredible. And you're going to try to maintain that level of response from the medication, and that's just not going to happen. And so often what occurs is you go and you keep upping your dose and upping your dose and upping your dose, and now we're going for a second med in there, we're going to up that dose, and eventually you're taking just a ton of stimulants, which is not great for your heart or your body. So I have found that you have to treat medications as a tool in the tool set. It is not going to do everything for you perfectly, but it is going to set up so you can, with a little bit of work, do the thing. And you have to keep, at least for me, I found that I keep my dosage very, very low. And just so you guys all have an idea, like I said, I've been on Adderall IR for like 8 or 10 years, something like that. I take a total of 15 milligrams a day.
Sure.
Just because I purposely keep my dose low, knowing it is not the silver bullet, but it's enough for me to work at it to make the things happen.
Yep. And
what?
Cool. Yep. Please.
ADHD interruption contest, right? So that's one. And then one thing that you mentioned a lot, like you're very hard on yourself and everything like that. And one thing that I've noticed with myself, especially having gone and been aware of my ADHD for almost 3 decades at this point, right? Or 2.5 decades, is I am significantly more forgiving of myself when I fall into the ADHD traps. Like at this point in time, I just know how it is, and it's cool. It's just not going to happen today, and I'm going to figure it out tomorrow, or I won't, and we're just going to keep moving forward. And so I'm very rarely down on myself for like those kinds of things.
That's really good. And everybody else, please take that to heart. A couple of the other things that you mentioned though regarding medication is that it's one piece. Like you said, it's one tool. And I think that sometimes, like you said, there's a bit of the honeymoon phase of like, wow, I'm starting to feel effects. And like, I didn't know that I was even capable of feeling this way and looking at things in that sense. And then guess what? Your body gets used to it. The effects might go down. And maybe a popular or unpopular opinion, psychiatrists are drug dealers and they will try to get you to take as much medication as possible. And my response to them is, have you tried 60 milligrams of that? And anyway, but yeah.
I can do everything. I can do everything right now.
I already did everything.
Right. There's definitely that line where it goes from like focusing you to giving you just an insane amount of energy.
Yeah.
Right? There's that line.
Yeah, and so that's why you got to be upfront. You got to give it a chance. Give it a chance, see how it works. If they tell you it's for a reason, they've done the study, they've got a PhD. I get that. But there's also a really important factor here, which is like you said, all the other elements in your tool belt that you're going to be using, whether exercise, creative projects, deep breathing, meditation. Make sure it's not to say it has to be this, you have to do this every day or that every day or even once a week, or things like that. But try, like, once again, the holistic approach, I think in my case has been beneficial, and just getting, putting all your eggs in one basket regarding the medication will probably set you up for a bit of disappointment, if not 100%. More. So yeah, once again, these are just 2 personal opinions. We're not medical professionals. But psychiatrists are drug dealers. You heard it here first. But still, those are all super good points. I think that the thing about forgiving yourself, and that's also as well, is that this, once again, this idea of like, I'm going to go from being a complete disaster to being like, like a #1, Harvard Business School discipline project manager where everything is just perfectly aligned. And establishing routines can be difficult, of trying to always do the same thing every day. But if you do it 3 times a week, that's really good too, so I think focusing more on the stuff that you are doing rather than beating yourself up for the things that you're not doing, I think that's an important part of it. And building in those forgiveness mechanisms to be like, you know what, it's okay. You're allowed to make mistakes. Now go on and do something next.
Yeah. And it's funny too. Like you said, like you don't have to do it every day, but if you do it 3 times a week, you're doing really, really good or whatever. And so structure is incredibly beneficial, like rigid structure. This is what you're doing from this hour to this hour. This is what you're doing from this hour to this hour is great for ADHD folks because it doesn't allow us to deviate, right? And I almost find it cruel universe joke that by default, the ADHD brain hates structure and having to do the same thing every single day for forever. That just makes us want to run in the opposite direction. But it's actually really beneficial for us.
Yes.
Just cool joke of the universe, right? Like,
I hear you on that, and I think it's up to everyone to be the sort of architect of what that structure is going to look like and what's going to work for them. Things like taking breaks, lots of stuff that's common also for not ADHD folks, like Pomodoro time of saying, okay, I'm going to focus on my task before. Also not putting all your tasks all together, separating them out in some kind of ways, doing the ones that you don't like first. There are lots of different approaches to that. I think everyone just has to find the one that works best for them. But then also building in those other things for the holistic approach, whether it's reading books, whether it's reading about ADHD and getting more educated so you understand better and have more, a stronger frame of reference about who you are and what you've gone through and how you interact with the world and how the world interacts with you. I think those things, like I said, building those in is very, very helpful. And with the structural side, I think we can all agree is beneficial, and yet we're naturally inclined to rebel against it. It's like, You give me a structure, I'm going to find 500 different ways to break it down,
100%.
Including my own structure. Like I said, I will outsmart myself, rebel against my own ideas and systems, and so once again, it's anticipating that, is know that there's got to be that deviation, or just always like, but what if I didn't do it? So anyway, that's been a part of it. In terms of you did talk a little bit about your job. Is there anything that you like to comment on about your experience as a professional and the work that you do and how that relates to ADHD in any way?
Yeah. So I'm definitely, and I always have been, especially in inside of engineering and cloud infrastructure. I've always had quite a bit of imposter syndrome. Not uncommon with ADHD folks. And I think part of that is at least in my experience, in my field, is that because, I think we discussed before, we all process information very, very fast. People immediately equate that to intelligence. And it's really not, right? It's really just speed at which you process. Like we discussed before, I can still arrive at the wrong answer, even though I thought through it quicker than someone else. And so that definitely plays into the imposter syndrome. And so I realized that always having to double check my suggestions or my solutions is a thing. Relied on my peers to make sure that I haven't missed anything, that I didn't just run off into a direction. So I can't tell you how many times, I have to decide a solution, and I spend, 2 days figuring out this super amazing system that'll do everything, but I forgot one critical piece that can't work in this thing. And so everything I just did is for naught. Happens all the time. Well, at least it did.
Yeah. No, or everything's been done so that you can get to a new approach.
Right, right.
Or, part of the process, but still.
Or my favorite, let's get 90% of it built. Now I'm just not going to finish it. I have to wrap a bow on it and pass it off to be done. I'll get to that tomorrow.
Yeah, that last step or sometimes last steps are so hard. And I remember even had a boss that told me, he was like, you're really good at starting things and getting them moving, and then execution is something that you're going to need help with. And I was like, you're right. And so I have to think about that. And I think we all do, whether we have ADHD or not. What's the definition of done? What does it look like when we cross the finish line? How do we define success? And what are the things that are going to be necessary to make sure that happens? In my case, I'm a big, big believer that I need other people with me. That I should not be. There are some things that I can do 100% on my own, for sure. But there are a lot of other things where I know in order for those things to happen, I need someone who, like I said, the Harvard business, project manager who has everything. That for me is a godsend. It's like, you tell me what to do and I'll do it. Because if not, left on my own devices, I'll kind of wander off and I'll be here and I'll be there. And then they'll end up being having 7 things moving, but none of them really at full capacity. And so once again, it's just anticipating that and trying to be transparent. And another thing as well too with ADHD folks, that when is it appropriate to mention that you have ADHD? When is it not? I don't want to say we're never. I don't ever try to mention it as an excuse or saying, well, I just have ADHD, so that's why I can't do that. It's like, no, I can, but you're gonna have to understand that my way of doing it might be a little bit different, or that I may need some help in some places, and in other areas I won't need any help where other people would need help. So it's just, And I think it really is up to everybody. So just, as and we talked about this in Detroit, like you can talk about it when you find that it's relevant or you think that the other person needs to know. It doesn't have to be a badge. It doesn't have, it's really up to everyone to do that. What's your take on that?
So actually really similar to yours. I think at every job I have had, at least let's say in my adult life, I've definitely informed my manager or whoever is in charge of my director, whomever, about ADHD and how it works. I also specifically dive into the brain's natural reward system. And if we can, I want to touch on this really fast. So another thing that I picked up from Dr. Barkley was that the reward system in everyone's brain is kind of dope, right? So basically how it works is as you're working on a project, whether it be school, for work, for whatever, as you accomplish certain pieces of it, you get that dopamine release, that motivation, that let's keep moving in that direction, right? And so that you get little bits, and then when you accomplish it, hooray, we got the full dopamine dump. Really, that's all we really want, right? All anyone wants is that sweet dopamine. The reward system in ADHD folks' brains is broken. We don't get those little like, hooray, you did a little bit of it, keep going as we do it, right? And so for me, I have found that external reward system works really well. And so like with managers or with coworkers or whatever, and I've been fortunate enough to have a majority of very, very solid people in charge of me or coworkers where they help build on that broken reward system as an outside source. And I don't know about you, but if someone comments on like how great you're doing and like the work you just produced is like 11 out of 10 and you're just amazing at this, well, that's a lot of fuel in the tank for us. Now I can go do some bigger things.
I completely agree. And also as someone who's like, initial opinion because of imposter syndrome or because of low self-esteem or just assuming that everything that I do is crap, like I really need that. And so then, but then that's also another thing with ADHD folks is that with some ADHD folks, a tendency that has been noted, the people pleaser. So like, I really need this from you. So I'm going to go above and beyond to make sure that you're going to give me those rewards at my own expense. And then sometimes not protecting yourself and just diving headfirst into, I'm going to do whatever it takes to make sure this person says something nice to me. I'm going to make it impossible for them not to. And I don't care if I have to try 10 times harder than everybody else, but like, I need this so badly because like you said, a lot of us don't get those dopamine hits from what other people get along the way. And I think that's a really good insight though, to talk about with managers. It's not that they need to constantly be saying like, Zach, you're the most amazing person we've ever seen, right? But saying good job and thank you are really easy things to do, and just letting somebody know, I see what you've done, and I want to tell you that you did a good job. A little bit goes a long way, so I'm definitely a big believer in that.
Yeah, it's it can be I want to call it life changing, and I guess it is, but it's really like work changing, right? Like if you get someone in charge of you who have like any level of empathy, that you just run a little bit different, and they're willing to like take a little bit extra time out of their day to make it better for you, and they're willing to. Gold.
I think it's a great point. Wow, I've learned a lot. I know how much you have, but I have, and there's a lot to chew on here. Is there anything else that we haven't mentioned? Because we know this could go on for very, very long.
ADHD folks getting talked on a topic and just going for hours?
So that means that. So let's go on some tangents. What's the one thing that people get wrong? What's the biggest thing that people get wrong about Star Wars?
The biggest thing people get wrong about Star Wars. That the Jedi were good folks.
Controversial.
Yeah.
Tell us more.
So, recently Star Wars went back about 200 years from Episode 1. It's just like they have like basically they're doing different phases, and they're all in books and comic form right now. And essentially it's called the High Republic, as opposed to Episode 1 to Episode 3 of Star Wars is the Fall of the Republic, right? This is supposed to be like at their peak. And at their peak, man, the Jedi 200 years ago, vastly different from today. There was a lot of individuality. Like you were encouraged to kind of like explore the Force as you wanted to explore it. And it's less about, there wasn't really like military or soldiers or commanding an army. They were just like, hey, we're trying to figure out all the things in the Force. People could just like, not necessarily leave the order, but they could just go kind of where the Force takes them and like take no oversight from the Jedi Temple and the Council and that was fine. Go explore, figure out how it works, do the thing. And it produces a lot of like compassionate Jedi. You fast forward to the Fall of the Republic, episodes 1 through 3. And you'll notice that like even the clothing becomes very, very similar. Everyone kind of wears the same colors, the same style of robes. It's all very uniform. And that came about from just, thousands of years or whatever of not having to deal with any major bad guys, if you will. Like there's no Sith, there's no nothing. And so it just became more and more rigid and less individualistic. And they became, what's the word I'm looking for? They became blinded in their hubris that any bad thing could really happen because they had been running around for so long as like a major power that like nothing could possibly happen to us. And as an example, like Yoda, we all know Yoda, from the High Republic has been on the council for a very long time. And so until more material comes out, I'm actually not sure if Yoda is even, not that he's not a good guy, he is, but whether or not he's a real good guy, because like it was during his watch that like all of these changes happened, which led to the massive ego, which prevented them from even seeing any bad thing growing, the Sith, Palpatine, etc., to where they ended up losing it all and the Empire took over just because they were blinded by their hubris that like they could do no wrong because they've been doing it for so long. And so not entirely sure if where the Jedi ended with the Fall of the Republic, if they were really like the good guys or if they were just kind of like warmongers. I think even at one point, Yoda says like during the Clone Wars that they can't do certain things unless they get approval from the Senate, but the Jedi are a religious group operating separately, but they basically became the Senate's lapdogs to kind of go off wherever they told them to go. Not super great for like the heroes, right? You're not supposed to be lapdogs of the government.
Independence. I see what you mean. Yeah. So there's like some government oversight, but at the same time, you're like, nah, like we're kind of doing our own thing.
Right.
And we're not subject to your mandate in the way that another person would be.
Working together versus being the lapdog of.
Got it. There's a lot of stuff that we could talk about related to that with both ADHD as well as organizational development. Let's keep it on Star Wars. Who's your least favorite character in Star Wars?
Ooh, least favorite character. That is an excellent question. Do I have a least favorite? I have a bunch of favorite characters, but least favorite, like even like the bad guys, like I really appreciate. Like at the end of the day, I think Palpatine is mostly one-dimensional, which is a common issue with a lot of Star Wars from back in the day. The good guys were clearly the good guys, and the bad guys were bad guys, just a bad guy. But I do feel with like more media, Palpatine is more nuanced. But he's really just, I just want to control it all, and I'm gonna control it all, so I'm gonna control it all. And so even though I like him as a villain because he's a scary villain, he's kind of a shallow character.
Now, a very controversial topic. As a Star Wars fan, what do you think about Jar Binks?
Oh, man. So are you familiar with the theory of Darth Jar Jar?
No, I'm not, but enlighten me.
Yeah, this is the whole thing. And so there's no confirmation. But so supposedly Jar Jar was originally designed to be a Sith Lord. Supposedly. There's a couple of like reasons for this inside of episode 1. So originally the idea, at least the thought is that much like Luke fighting Yoda on Dagobah, you find this crazy old hermit who's just talking crazy, and I'll lead you to this great warrior, sure, but I'm a Looney Tune, right? And then it turns out that this crazy hermit is actually this incredibly powerful Jedi Master, right? Same concept with Jar Jar, but Sith. He is this bumbling fool. You would never expect him to be this big villain or whatever. But if you watch a lot of his goofs in episode 1, they end up helping in a lot of cases. Like when he ends up dropping, like when he's messing around with Anakin's pod and he drops something into it, that actually plays a role in Anakin's victory over Sebulba. It's almost like he knew that he needed to do a thing, but act like he's a bumbling fool to drop the thing in and get his tongue all numbed or whatever. And this is the big take on it. There's one scene in episode 1 where Jar Jar leaps from a balcony to another balcony. And it's done very, very fast. And so you just figure, okay, they just sped it up because they sped it up. But the scene after hops to a couple of D1 battle droids, and their heads look up and they track Jar Jar at exactly the same speed, like he force jumped across. And so there's a lot of theories on that. That being said, he is absolutely the reason that that Palpatine was able to take control, which more plays into him being Sith, right? He's the one who called for the vote of no confidence on Chancellor Valorum, which got the Senate to vote Palpatine into power and to get Palpatine, wartime powers to like continue doing ruling, and then Palpatine just kept it. And so Jar Jar's the one who called for the vote. That kind of started it all.
Jar Binks, the Sith on the grassy knoll. This is interesting.
Potentially a Sith Lord.
Wow.
But basically, the reason it was scrapped, or the theory is why it was scrapped, is because he was so ill-received after Episode 1, they just regulated him to something else.
Yeah, I think they made a good choice from what everyone said. Anyway, but wow, very enlightening. We do have to wrap it up. Is there anything else? Where can people find you? What's the best way if somebody wants to reach out and get in touch? Anything like that?
Oh, sure. My LinkedIn, which I think is just my first name followed by my first initial followed by my last name. I'm pretty sure. I'm in here as Zachary Punches. Yeah. Yep. That's probably the best way to get a hold of me. To find me on LinkedIn.
Very good. All right. Zach, this was amazing. Thank you so much for being the first guest on ADHme, ADHwe. I look forward to future conversations, so don't go too far. And hopefully see you in some Cloud Native events at some point. And I really, really enjoyed this conversation. You're setting a high bar for future guests. But it was a pleasure having you. And thanks again for your time.
All right, man. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise. Take care.
Cool.
Cheers.
You too. Bye-bye.